The moment the small alien girl pointed at the human, the entire hall went silent. Not polite silence. Not curiosity. The kind that comes when something irreversible has just happened. Ethan Vale felt it instantly. Dozens of alien eyes locked onto him at once, sharp and calculating, as if he had stepped into a role he never agreed to. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. But everything had changed. In front of him stood the cause. She was small, barely reaching his waist, with faintly glowing skin like starlight trapped beneath glass. Her eyes were large, luminous, and completely steady. There was no hesitation in her posture, only certainty. "You've been assigned to me." The words didn't feel real. "Sign." Ethan blinked slowly, waiting for someone to interrupt. No one did. The chamber remained frozen. Tall, elegant alien officials stood motionless, their flowing garments shimmering softly. Their expressions were controlled, but their eyes revealed it. Concern. And something else. Recognition. Ethan exhaled quietly, forcing himself to stay calm. Panic never helped. Training took over. Observe first, react later. Even when nothing made sense. He looked back at her. "You're going to need to explain that." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "There is nothing to explain." That made it worse. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, glancing around again. No one corrected her. No one stepped in. Which meant this wasn't a mistake. A taller alien stepped forward from the crowd, his presence commanding immediate attention. "The declaration has been made." Ethan frowned. Declaration of what? Bond assignment. 2 words. Cold. Final. Ethan almost laughed. "That's not how things work where I come from." A subtle ripple passed through the room. The girl didn't look away. "Your system is inefficient." "My system includes asking first." A longer pause followed. The atmosphere shifted. Curiosity replaced some of the tension. The girl spoke again, slower this time. "Consent." Ethan nodded once. "Exactly." Something flickered in her glowing eyes. "You are declining." There it was. Ethan hesitated, but only for a second. "Yes." The reaction was immediate. Several aliens shifted. One nearly stepped forward before stopping himself. The tension sharpened instantly. But the girl didn't react. That response was anticipated. Ethan exhaled. "Good to know I'm predictable." "You are not predictable." He frowned. "Then what am I?" She looked at him more closely now, as if seeing something deeper. "Unverified." "That's not reassuring." "It is not meant to be." Ethan glanced around. The pressure in the room hadn't eased. If anything, it had grown heavier. "Let's say I keep saying no," he said. "What happens?" The silence that followed was absolute. "It changes nothing." That answer settled heavily. Not threatening. Worse. Certain. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Faint. Warm. He frowned, pressing a hand lightly against it. "What is that?" No one answered. But everyone reacted. Some stepped back. Others leaned forward. Touching. The girl moved closer, stopping just in front of him. Her small hand hovered near his chest. "It has begun." Ethan looked down. A faint glow moved beneath his skin. Soft at first, then brighter. "What has begun?" "The bond." The word hit harder than expected. Around them, the chamber broke into whispers. "It's activating." "That's impossible." "Not without alignment." Ethan barely heard them. The light inside him pulsed again. Stronger. And strangely familiar. He looked back at her. "You knew." "Yes." "And didn't explain." "You would not have understood." He let out a slow breath. "Fair." The light surged again. This time the chamber itself reacted. The walls shimmered faintly. The air felt different, charged, alive. Ethan straightened, something inside him shifting with it. Not fear. Not panic. Adaptation. He looked at the aliens. Uncertain now, no longer in control. then back at her. You chose me. Yes. Why? For the first time she paused. Not uncertainty. Careful selection. Because you do not break. The light between them pulsed again. Steady now. Stronger. Ethan felt it settle inside him. Not as something foreign, but something that had always been there. Waiting. He looked at the room again. Their fear. At their hesitation. Then back at her. You're all afraid of this. No one answered. They didn't need to. Ethan exhaled slowly. Tension leaving his shoulders. Yeah, he murmured. That makes sense. Because for the first time since arriving on this world, he understood one thing clearly. This wasn't about control. Never was. It was about humanity stepping into something bigger. And not backing down. The chamber did not return to normal. Couldn't. Whatever balance had existed before was gone, replaced by something unstable, something no one fully understood. The glowing patterns beneath Ethan's skin no longer flickered randomly. They pulsed with rhythm now. Steady, controlled, almost deliberate. Live. And every alien in the hall was watching him like that was the most dangerous part. Ethan slowly lowered his hand from his chest, exhaling as he tested the sensation. It wasn't painful. It wasn't overwhelming anymore. It was synchronized. That realization alone should have concerned him more. Instead, it grounded him. Around him, the officials no longer stood as confident rulers. Their posture had shifted, subtle but undeniable. Distance had formed. Not physical distance but instinctive caution. They weren't looking at him like an outsider anymore. They were looking at him like a variable. Or worse, a solution they didn't control. She activated it too early. The voice came from the same tall authority figure. His composure remained, but there was tension beneath it now, tight and restrained. This should not be possible. Ethan glanced toward him, then back at the girl. She keeps saying that like I had a say in it. You did not, the girl replied calmly. Good, Ethan muttered. Because I definitely missed that part. A faint ripple moved through the chamber again. Less shock this time, more adjustment. They were adapting. Just like he was. The girl stepped slightly closer, standing beside him now instead of in front. That alone changed something. It wasn't possession. It wasn't control. Felt like alignment. The process is stabilizing, she said. Ethan looked down at the fading glow beneath his skin. It wasn't disappearing, it was settling, becoming part of him instead of something separate. What exactly did you do to me? I completed the initiation. That's not an explanation. It is sufficient. Ethan almost smiled at that. Almost. Before he could respond, movement spread across the chamber. Several higher-ranking figures approached, their presence heavier, more commanding than the rest. Authority. Real authority. The human will be isolated. The statement cut cleanly through the room. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Isolated sounds a lot like detained. It is precautionary. Yeah, that's not better. The officials stopped a short distance away, their attention fixed entirely on him now. Not curiosity. Assessment. You represent an uncontrolled reaction, one of them continued. Until we understand the extent of this bond, you will be removed. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, glancing at the girl. You going to explain why that sounds like a bad idea? No. That got his attention. No. It is a bad idea. Ethan let out a short breath. Appreciate the honesty. The officials didn't react to the exchange. If anything, their posture hardened. You will comply. Ethan looked back at them. For a moment, the old instinct surfaced, the one trained to de-escalate, to cooperate, to survive through compliance. Then the light in his chest pulsed again. Stronger. Not aggressive. Certain. And something inside him answered it. Well. He straightened slightly, meeting their gaze. Yeah. I don't think I will. The reaction was immediate. Several guards shifted position. The tension snapped tight again, sharper than before. He refuses directive. Non-compliance confirmed. Ethan exhaled slowly. You're talking about me like I'm not standing right here. You are a risk. Maybe, he replied calmly. But I'm also the only one not panicking right now. That landed. Not loudly, but effectively. The chamber hesitated. Even the officials paused just for a second. Because he wasn't wrong. They were reacting. He wasn't. The girl stepped forward again, placing herself slightly between Ethan and the approaching figures. Her presence was small, but the effect was immediate. No one moved closer. He remains, she said. This is no longer your decision. It was always my decision. The air shifted again. This time it wasn't just tension. It was pressure. Something deeper, older, woven into the very structure of the place reacted to her words. The walls shimmered faintly, echoing the pulse that still moved beneath Ethan's skin. The officials noticed. And for the first time, they hesitated. Ethan frowned slightly, catching the change. Okay, he muttered under his breath. That's new. The glow in his chest surged again, stronger than before. This time it didn't stay contained. Faint threads of light extended outward, barely visible, but unmistakably reaching toward her. The moment they touched, the reaction was immediate. A low hum filled the chamber. Not mechanical, not artificial, live. The structure responded. The light spread across the walls, shifting color, deepening in intensity. The air itself felt different, clearer, lighter, like something long dormant had just been reawakened. They're synchronizing. That shouldn't be possible without. It is happening. Ethan glanced down at the faint threads connecting them, then back at her. Tell me that's normal. It is not. Great. Despite everything, there was no fear in his voice now. Only focus. Because whatever this was, it wasn't hurting him. It wasn't breaking him. It was aligning with him. The officials took a step back. Not strategically. Instinctively. And that was when Ethan realized something important. They weren't in control anymore. He looked around the chamber, at the uncertainty, the hesitation, the shift in power that no one wanted to acknowledge. Then he looked at the girl. You knew this would change things. Yes. How much? She met his gaze. All of it. The honesty in that answer should have been terrifying. Instead, made sense. Ethan let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders slightly as the last of the tension left his body. Yeah, he said quietly. I figured. Because the moment he stopped resisting it, everything became clear. This wasn't a trap. This wasn't a mistake. This was something humanity had walked into without realizing it. And now that it had begun, it wasn't going to stop. The chamber stood in silence again. But this time, it wasn't fear of the unknown. It was recognition. Something had changed. Something fundamental. And standing at the center of it was a human who refused to break. And a bond no one could control anymore. The silence this time felt different. Not frozen. Not uncertain. Butching. The chamber was no longer reacting in panic. It was observing, adjusting, recalculating around a reality it could no longer deny. The glowing structure that surrounded them pulsed softly now. No longer erratic, no longer unstable. Had accepted the change. Which meant everyone else had to. Ethan stood at the center of it. The fading threads of light still connecting him to the small alien girl beside him. They weren't as bright as before, but they were still there. Steady, constant, like something that had always existed and had finally revealed itself. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself again. The fear should have been there. The confusion. But neither controlled him anymore. Because the more this unfolded, the clearer it became. The officials shifted, no longer advancing, no longer issuing commands. Their authority hadn't disappeared, but it had weakened. Not politically. Instinctively. You feel it too, the girl said quietly. Ethan glanced at her. Yeah. He didn't need to ask what she meant. The connection wasn't just visible, it was tangible. A shared awareness, Subtle but undeniable, like standing in perfect rhythm with something else. Not controlled. Not forced. Blind. Around them, the higher council remained still, but their hesitation had turned into something deeper. Recognition. This was never supposed to happen naturally. One of them finally spoke, their voice lower now, stripped of its earlier certainty. The bond was lost. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Lost things don't usually just come back on their own. No, another replied quietly. They don't. That answer carried weight. The kind that came with history. The kind that explained fear. Ethan looked at them more carefully now, not just as authority figures but as a species dealing with something they had once known. And somehow lost. And now it had returned. Through him. That's why you're afraid, he said. It wasn't a question. No one denied it. The girl didn't move, but her presence beside him felt stronger now. Not physically, but in the way the connection between them held steady, reinforcing itself. They cannot control it, she said. Ethan let out a quiet breath. Yeah, he murmured. That tends to bother people. The chamber remained still. But the tension had changed. It wasn't about stopping him anymore. It was about understanding what came next. One of the council members stepped forward again. Slower this time, careful. If this bond stabilizes, they said, then our entire system, our structure, will be affected. Ethan nodded slightly. Sounds like it already is. Another pause. Longer. He could see it now. The way they looked at him had shifted completely. No longer just a variable. No longer just a risk. Something else. Something inconveniently necessary. And what exactly do you expect me to do about that? Ethan asked. The question hung in the air. Because for all their authority, they didn't have an answer. The girl did. You remain. Ethan glanced at her. That's the plan. Yes. That's not really a plan. It is sufficient. He almost laughed again. Almost. You're very confident about all of this. Yes. Why? For the first time since everything began. Her answer came without pause. Because you are still standing. That hit differently. Not dramatic. Not exaggerated. Simple. True. Ethan looked down at his hands, the faint glow beneath his skin barely visible now. But still there. Still present. Still part of him. Then he looked back at the chamber. At the aliens who had expected control. At the system that had never accounted for someone like him. And slowly, he understood. Humans didn't fit clean systems. They didn't follow predetermined paths. They adapted. They questioned. They endured. And when something tried to define them without permission, they pushed back. Not recklessly, but firmly. I'm not here to replace your system, Ethan said, his voice steady. No one interrupted. I'm not here to take control. The officials listened. 'Cause now, they had to. But I'm also not going to be something you lock away because it makes you uncomfortable. That landed. Clear. Unavoidable. The girl didn't react, but the connection between them pulsed slightly, as if acknowledging the statement. Agreement. The council exchanged brief glances. Not unified. Not certain. But no longer dismissive. You would remain freely? One of them asked. Ethan shrugged lightly. Yeah. Was. And comply. Ethan met their gaze. No. Another ripple moved through the chamber. But this time, it wasn't tension. It was something closer to understanding. I'll cooperate, he continued calmly. I'll answer questions. I'll help you figure this out. The glow beneath his skin pulsed once, steady. But I'm not giving up my choice. Silence followed. Then slowly, one of the council members lowered their head. Not submission. Acknowledgement. Others followed. Not all. But enough. The shift was subtle. But real. The girl stepped slightly closer to him. Her presence no longer something separate. Not assigned. Not forced. Chosen. And for the first time since this began, Ethan didn't question it. Because the connection didn't feel like control. Felt like balance. He exhaled slowly, tension finally leaving his shoulders. "All right," he said quietly. The chamber seemed to settle with him. Not completely, not comfortably, but enough, because something new had taken root. Something no system had planned for. Something no authority could contain. A human who refused to break. A bond that refused to be controlled. And a future that no one in that room could predict anymore. But for the first time, they weren't trying to stop it. They were learning how to live with it. The chamber didn't return to order. It adapted, slowly, uneasily, but undeniably. The glow that had once surged wildly between Ethan and the small alien girl had settled into something steady now. No longer unpredictable. No longer unstable. Complete. Ethan could feel it clearly, like a second rhythm layered over his own heartbeat. Not controlling him. Not overriding him. Matching him. For the first time since arriving on this world, nothing inside him felt out of place. And that was exactly what terrified everyone else. "They are stabilizing." The voice came from one of the council members, quieter now, stripped of authority and replaced with something far more honest. "Oh." Ethan glanced around the chamber. No one was moving against him anymore. No one was issuing commands. The guards who once stood ready now held their positions without tension. The council no longer looked like rulers facing a threat. They looked like witnesses. Witnesses to something they had never expected to see again. Or perhaps, something they believed was gone forever. Ethan shifted slightly, rolling his shoulders as the last traces of pressure left his body. The connection between him and the girl remained constant. Calm, grounded, real. He looked down at her. This is the part where someone finally explains everything. She met his gaze, her luminous eyes steady. "This is the part where you already understand." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he admitted. "I think I do." And he did. Not in details. Not in history. But in truth. This wasn't about control. It never had been. The bond wasn't something that could be forced, assigned, or engineered. That's why their system had failed. Because they had tried to turn something natural into something structured. Predictable. But humans were none of those things. "They tried to recreate it," Ethan said, looking at the council. "Didn't they?" No one answered immediately. They didn't need to. "They lost it," he continued quietly. "And instead of understanding why, they tried to control it." A slow shift moved through the chamber. Not denial. Recognition. The girl spoke. "The bond requires balance." Ethan nodded slightly. "Not obedience." "Yes." "Not perfection." "Yes." He looked around again. "But choice." That was the part that mattered. That was the part they had removed. And that was why it had never worked. The council stood in silence, their authority no longer absolute, their certainty no longer intact. 'Cause for the first time, they were wrong. Ethan looked back at the girl. "You didn't assign me," he said. No. You chose me." "Yes. And I chose to stay." The faintest shift crossed her expression. Not just certainty. Something warmer. "Correct." The connection between them pulsed once. Soft, steady, complete. Not activation. Not reaction. Belonging. Around them, the chamber responded again. The living structure glowing faintly as if acknowledging the truth settling into place. "It is finished," one of the council members whispered. Another shook their head slightly. "No." They looked at Ethan. "It has begun." That felt more accurate. Ethan let out a slow breath, a small smile forming despite everything. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That sounds about right. Because this wasn't an ending. Not really. It was a reset. A system that had stood for generations, structured, controlled, rigid, had just been rewritten by something it couldn't predict. Human. Not stronger. Not more advanced. But different. Unbreakable in ways they didn't understand. Adaptable in ways they couldn't replicate. Free in ways they had forgotten. The council lowered their heads again, not out of submission but acknowledgement. not to him alone, but to what he represented. Change. The girl stepped closer, no longer hesitant, no longer testing. Certain. This time when she took his hand, he didn't question it. The connection didn't surge. It didn't overwhelm. Simply remained. Stable. Cool. Real. Ethan looked down at her, then back at the chamber, at the entire system that had tried to define something it never truly understood. Guess you were right, he said. She tilted her head slightly. About what? He smirked faintly. That I wouldn't break. For the first time. She smiled fully. Not calculated. Not subtle. Genuine. Yes, she said. And the light between them didn't grow brighter. It didn't need to. Because it was no longer something forming. It was something that had always been waiting. The chamber stood in quiet acceptance. The empire adjusted. And somewhere beyond that room, beyond that world, something far greater had just changed. Not because it was forced. Not because it was commanded. But because a human had been given a choice. And chose to stand. And in that choice, an entire civilization remembered what it meant to be whole again.